Hello listeners, and welcome to the Montel Weekly Podcast, bringing you energy matters in an informal setting. We return after the summer break with a look at the biggest issue in European, if not global energy markets, the return or not of Nord Stream 1 and the ever-growing likelihood that Russia will fully turn off the taps to Europe. In later episodes, we will discuss the ramifications of such an eventuality, but this week we will delve into current supply and demand developments. Helping me, Richard Sverrisson, to make sense of the toing and froing over the Nord Stream 1 turbine and much, much more is Yuriy Onyshkiv of London Stock Exchange Group. A warm welcome to you, Yuriy.
Thank you for having me, Richard.
So, Yuriy, you're based in Kiev at the moment, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, and could you maybe give the listeners a bit of an insight what daily life there is like? What's it like at the moment in the capital city of Ukraine?
So it's pretty normal considering the circumstances, as I used to say right now, because every of my colleagues in the West is wondering how our lives here. But I would say, restaurants are open. There's a heavy traffic on the street. Banks are properly open. But despite what's happening in the east of the country, it has returned to some normalcy, I would say. Considering the circumstances, although we get regular air raid sirens, and then there is a curfew in the city. But other than that, it has returned to some level of normality, which is we can see in other capitals in Europe.
Okay, man, that's great to hear. But are there any what's it like living under this threat of potentially of bombardment or of air raids?
Well, I should say I won't lie. It's a little stressful. I guess not a little more than stressful. But people cope with in a different ways. I guess some leave the city to go to some rural areas where presumably could be made safer. Some go abroad or to the west of the country where again could be presumably safer. It can't be 100% safe in Ukraine in general. But my focus, I would say, my savior is I try to focus my work as much as I can, and that keeps me off the news, keeps me off the political news in Ukraine, of the geopolitical news in Ukraine. So that's kind of my island of silence, I would say.
Well, let's discuss your work in more detail. Your specialist subject, which is the European gas market, Yuriy. So we're very honoured and very pleased to have you on the pod this week. But we saw yesterday, we had the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, standing for a photographic opportunity in front of the Nord Stream 1 turbine. Then Gazprom later talking about we can't start the turbine. Given the sanction situation, what do you make of this sort of tug of war here, Yuriy?
Well, this is a very symbolic gesture by the German Chancellor, which highlights the importance of all these Russian flows in general, particularly for Germany. I mean, we haven't seen this before, that a German Chancellor would come and visit some spare part being repaired and on its way from point A to point B. But, this is, again, as you rightly said, is a tug of war between Germany and Russia. And on a broader scale between Europe and Russia regarding these Russian flows. And this is just highlights how important the Russian imports are for the broader Europe.
Absolutely. What's your view here? Do you think Gazprom wants the turbine refitted? Do you think it's playing a game here where it's gradually going to ease, or squeeze the supply so then it dwindles to nothing?
I think what Gazprom wants is that, and they've said it a few times already, that they want to have their sanctions, to have Western sanctions lifted from Russia, and to have Nord Stream 2 launched, to have business as usual, and that's essentially what they want. And the turbine is refitted. As we can see, it has been returned from Canada to Germany and is on the way to go to Russia as soon as Russians supply ask for actually that to be brought to Russia. because it's not like a, a courier delivery that you can just put it outside of your mailbox and for the host to pick it up. It's a little more complicated than that, and this is what they want. And I think that this tug of war regarding the turbine is just a small part of it, and the entire decrease in Russian flows is kind of a bigger highlight of what perhaps Gazprom is trying to achieve. Is trying to achieve like a more maybe strategic advantage.
I mean, this brings me on to my next question, which maybe is slightly loaded, Yuriy, but why doesn't Gazprom then use spare capacity on alternative routes to offset these cuts on Nord Stream 1 if the turbine is the issue?
Well, exactly. We shouldn't be talking about the turbine or the Nord Stream 1 at all. We should be talking about the supply of gas. And so you have, Gazprom as the only supplier from Russia, and you have multiple recipients of that gas in Europe. And, we should be talking about the ability of Russia to supply that gas to these recipients in Europe, and so with all capacities that are available, and there are multiple capacities available. You have a pipeline through Poland, through Belarus, Poland, and into Germany. You have the pipeline to Slovakia through Ukraine, and which could fully offset the decrease of Nord Stream 1. And now that's now a bigger question. Why is Russia not using this supply? Why are they focusing on the turbine and not Nord Stream 1? And there's no reason clearly why they're not using this. So which brings me on to we could be switching discussing politics, but that essentially is not a fundamental supply and demand question. It's more of a geopolitical issue.
And a question of, what the strategy that Gazprom has here, and that's been very obvious maybe since last autumn, in a sense of slowly squeezing the supply. So, it was a loaded question, but I think, it's part of potentially the long-term strategy, and only Gazprom headquarters and the Kremlin will know the answer to why they don't use that, although we can speculate. But if we come down to supply and demand fundamentals, Yuriy, if Nord Stream 1 stays at 20% capacity, how likely is the EU to meet winter storage targets?
Well, it would be very difficult to meet these storage targets, although not impossible. Europe is already discussing a 15% reduction in demand. Which to be fair, will not impact the heating or the household demand. It will probably affect mostly like industrial, some gas or power demand. But yeah, I mean that alone will have storages perhaps just short of the 80% fullness that a European Union is targeting by the 1st of November. So they would need to voluntarily or not voluntarily try to decrease the demand in some way. So, but the big question I think here is that even if they reach that fullness in storages, or they could be just short of it, which is already fine in a normal, so to say, setting, but any prolonged kind of supply deficit would make it would just roll over the crisis onto the next summer, because by the end of the winter we would end up seeing very depleted storages, and there will be a lot of pressure onto the next summer for injections, and hence why we are seeing this, for instance, TTF summer 23 prices trading at a premium to winter 23 prices, which just shows how the market is perceiving the situation already. Because normally summer is trading at a discount to winter, but it's not the case right now, which just shows how kind of difficult the situation could be, not only in this winter, but in the next summer and the winter to come afterwards.
So no respite until 2024, 25 even maybe. But, people, experts are saying that the winter is the crunch period. You get through that and you kind of start to see a light at the end of the tunnel, even though summer prices are extremely high. Is that the key, getting through the winter, or is there more to it than that, Yuriy?
Of course, winters could be very unpredictable. It's the weather. It's alternative supply of energy, like the wind generation and the entire temperature. That is impacting. If we get very cold winter, that would fasten the depletion of the storages. Certainly so. And then for instance, last winter was kind of mild compared to what it could be, and it allowed kind of save a little gas going into the summer. But there could be many uncertainties throughout the year. Like any outages, for instance, in the US, there was a fire at Freeport LNG, and similar things could happen elsewhere. On the flip side, we're seeing a decrease in demand in China due to the COVID restrictions and economic slowdown, so which leaves more LNG cargoes on the market and for Europe to snap up. So there are many uncertainties and many fluctuations throughout the year, and particularly in winter. In winter, this is very acutely felt. Any smaller or bigger outage, for instance, in Norway, particularly unplanned outage, could bring up the spot prices very fast and very high.
And of course, when Norway is pumping gas, at full capacity to Europe and to continental Europe and to the UK, then any small, the systems at full stretch, if you like. So any small glitch, and that could, send this infrastructure into some sort of outage situation. So, but what, for the EU to meet its winter storage targets, how much does it depend on countries meeting the 50% gas demand cut aim here? You mentioned it earlier, Yuriy, but is to meet the storage, do we need to cut demand by that amount?
I think that two variables to the storage fullness equation, so to say. So one is the Russian flows. If they do not pick up in the next weeks or so, then the EU would need to slow down on consumption in order to fill up the storages, because the rest of the supply routes, so to say, are operating at full capacity or even above this nameplate capacity. And I'm talking about Norwegian supplies, talking about LNG flows. They have been flowing at very maximum capacity. And for very economic reasons, because prices in Europe are so high that Europe has been a preferred market for uncommitted LNG cargoes for several months now. So the only kind of flexibility here is in the demand and in the Russian flows. So it's either or, and ideally both. A little bit of savings on the demand and some pickup in Russian flows.
Do you think that some countries should impose even more stricter gas demand cut targets? I mean, what I see lacking a bit. There's some talk of lowering, the heating by 1 degree, or wearing more warmer clothes. But I don't see any sort of radical kind of an urge to be more efficient and cut energy use across the board, not just in industry, but elsewhere. So do you think some countries should impose stricter targets here to cut demand?
Well, Richard, it's hard to say, because every country is very different in EU. Some countries are more dependent on natural gas, others are more dependent on nuclear energy and more like a coal-fired generation. Some are more dependent on Russian gas, some are less. So that it really depends on the country. Some countries, could very well go well beyond the 15% target, and that could help, the rest of Europe on storage injections and essentially on consumption targets. And I think that it's hard really to judge and give prescriptions to each and every country here. I think that essentially and in Brussels they know that this is critical for everyone. So everyone will have to try to do whatever everyone can. However, regarding the turning down the heating demand for households, I'm not very sure that. First of all, this is the path to go. And second of all, it's feasible to achieve, mainly because of the setup of the heating throughout Europe in different countries. For instance, in Western Europe, you can't just centrally turn down the heating for the entire block of apartments or houses. This is something you can do in Eastern Europe and in the former USSR, like in Ukraine and Russia, where the heating is centrally supplied. And it has been done in Ukraine, for instance, during some of the supply deficit. It has been turned down centrally, and that helped really save a lot of gas for a couple of weeks. But I'm not sure this is something that governments in Europe will be happy to go into as first steps, because again, this could be very political for the ruling governments.
Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely. As far as I can tell, my understanding is that the gas demand cut targets are voluntary. Would you see a move towards more mandatory cuts here going forward?
Well, that's if again, I think that is. The reason I think Europe is doing this voluntary is because it would be hard to agree upon a mandatory. Since this target appeared, we've already seen several countries saying that they don't happy about the plan to decrease the consumption by 15%, and I think this is. In many cases, this is justified because some of them are very reliant on natural gas, and they will really have to, shut down a lot of consumers, and that will really, hit their economies. So I think that a joint effort for voluntary effort is probably the way to go, and essentially maybe that could be the only way to go because European Union has many members, and you would need to have a joint agreement, and it'll be really, really hard to achieve politically.
Absolutely, and at this stage, you don't want to sow disunity or discord. You want to maintain a united stand. So we're talking about a drop in demand. Have you already seen that happen in some areas in Europe, and where and in what kind of sectors, Yuriy?
Well, we've seen this happening over the last 12 months already, compared to the previous years. And this is mainly, I think, to the elevated gas prices. We've seen, I think, in September, October last year, several fertilizer businesses have, shut down some or most of their production. We have seen some bankruptcies in the UK, for instance, among energy suppliers. Some of the that they couldn't handle the swings in prices already back in last autumn, when the prices started to continue to pick up. Actually, not started to pick up. We're forgetting that it hasn't started this year. It has started a little longer than this year. So yeah, I mean it's a major thing to be done,
and it probably will likely to continue and maybe even accelerate. But I'm going to ask you a little bit of a difficult question now, Yuriy. But do you think that Nord Stream 1 will ever return to full capacity?
It's a very, very good question, and I had this kind of keeps me up at night, I would say. On one hand, clearly Russians have said that they they would like to have sanctions lifted and Nord Stream 2 launched. So you don't need to be an analyst to see what they want, because they already say that out loud and many times, particularly recently. Former German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder said about it, and this is coming out of Kremlin directly already. Apart from other people, but I think that this is now essentially, as I see this, as a waiting game. Russia is trying to achieve their goals by squeezing the supply clearly, because there's no justification why they're not using, for instance, the Ukrainian route. There's book capacity. They're not fully utilized by Russia, and they can lift sanctions for this pipeline through Poland. Gazprom could lift Russia could lift their sanctions for the pipeline through Poland, which is why they're not supplying through Poland, and they can very well do that. And Europe is clearly squeezed. And we can see it by looking at the prices. But on the flip side, in Russia itself, Russia would have to decrease their production by double figure percentages this year because of these decreased supplies to Europe. Now they are already have recently they said they had in storages 81% of the gas that they're targeting to have by the winter. So in the next couple of 2-3 months, Russia would have probably their storages filled up to the brim, which means that by that time they would need either to lift the supplies to Europe or further decrease their production. And that could have a detrimental effect to their future production, because some of the fields are not flexible. They need to be, shut down for good. And so that's a very, difficult situation, not only for Europe, but also for Russia. And unfortunately, we don't have much visibility on the Russian balance, because most of these figures are not published as periodically, as frequently as in Europe, which we can't really say and calculate when Russia will achieve the complete fullness in storages. And there's no other route they can put this production. I mean, they can't ship this to China, because that pipeline into China is detached from the rest of the system. They can't pump more gas into the domestic market, and so essentially they will be forced again either to pump it in Europe or decrease production by a lot more.
And then that obviously has a big economic effect on them. So that's very interesting. So the domestic situation may force Russia to pump more, and they have to, maybe that will supersede more global geopolitical elements here. But Yuriy, you mentioned LNG earlier. To what extent do you think LNG will help Europe in achieving sufficient supply this winter, and from which areas in particular?
Well, the LNG has been a major saver of Europe in the last half a year, in the last 12 months already. It has, the LNG arrivals and send-outs have, I would say, almost tripled, and they have replaced most of what Russia has removed from the market, and it will play, I would say, a crucial role this winter, and I think in years to come. And particularly regarding this increase in capacity, in import capacities, because I think that's the major bottleneck right now for Europe. That most of the LNG terminals are operating, above their nameplate capacity. So it's not likely that they will be able to, pick up more cargoes than they're already doing. And so the increase in capacities in this floating storage and regasification units across Europe, which we've seen numerous plans across the board in Italy, Germany, Greece, and elsewhere that they would need to pick up these capacities. But that clearly is not going to come, perhaps not until next year. So, but again, that just means that the market share of LNG is very important and will increase its importance. And just look at the historical numbers this year. Most of the increase has come from LNG cargoes from the United States, because that's where most of the uncommitted cargoes were coming from, and that kind of coincided with some of the export capacity increases in the United States.
Absolutely. I think just to round off the discussion, Yuriy, across Europe, there are mainly, we are in a perfect storm of very bullish factors. We have, problems at French nuclear plants. We have high temperatures and low water levels in both Germany and France. We have very low reservoirs in the Nordic region. It's all pointing to high prices. That's without the Nord Stream or the gas supply from Russia problems here. So, are there any factors which could point to, could you pressurize prices downwards, and what would they be?
I think that the market is currently, and it has been for a few months already, very, very sensitive to any news, mainly on the bullish side, but also on the bearish side as well. So any pickup in production, for instance, in the Dutch production, in the UK production, any indications of any bearish drivers, or any indications of the bearish drivers, like this implementation of this plan for consumption cuts, could send very bearish signals to the market, and could kind of suppress prices, for some time, and that will play a very strong signal to the market.
Okay, Yuriy, thank you very much for joining the Montel Weekly Podcast this week. All the best to you and to you and your family in Kiev.
Thank you very much, Richard.
So, listeners, you can now follow the podcast on our own Twitter account, aptly named the Montel Weekly Podcast. Please direct message any suggestions, questions, or let us know if you think you have a good idea for a guest on the show. You can also send us an email to podcast@montelnews.com. Lastly, remember to keep up to date with all that's happening in energy markets on Montel News. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Thank you and goodbye.